Next, it's a significant week for bereaved families and survivors of the Grenfell fire, which killed 72 people, as the long-awaited final report from the public inquiry is to be published on Wednesday. 7 years on, it's been an agonising wait for answers in their fight for justice. Aisha Baksh has been speaking to families who say they are both hopeful and sceptical about what the inquiry's landmark report will achieve.
Of the 72 people who died as a result of the Grenfell Tower fire, 18 of them were children. Among them Jessica Urbano Ramirez, who was 2 weeks from her 13th birthday. She was from a big British South American family with roots in Colombia.
She was the youngest girl in the family. She was amazing. We won't know. We won't know what she could have been because the world was all ahead of her. That has been taken away.
The public inquiry heard how Jessica's desperate call to 999 lasted for nearly an hour. Her aunt, Sandra Ruiz, closely followed the inquiry and is anxious about what changes it can achieve in order to prevent another Grenfell.
I'm hopeful that the recommendations will be very clear and very strong. I'm hopeful that the government will listen, internalise and implement in as short a time as possible, because we've already had 7 years of waiting for something to happen. I'm fearful that, as in previous governments, recommendations will be kicked down the line.
And like many families and survivors I've spoken to on and off camera, Sandra is also wary of what the report could mean for justice for Jessica and the other victims of the fire.
You know, justice will not be complete without people serving prison sentences.
And how hopeful are you that that report will lead to both of those, the avenue for prosecutions, but also that permanent, long-lasting change?
If it doesn't, it won't have served its purpose. Because 7 years of parallel investigations between the inquiry and the CPS and the police, if that doesn't reap those results, then why have we wasted all these millions of pounds?
Aisha Baksh, BBC London.
Well, as we know, there have been ongoing questions as to why warnings, signs and recommendations from previous fires in the capital were not heeded. And even now, there are hundreds of buildings in London still yet to be made safe. Our correspondent Carl Mercer takes up the story.
It's a summer's day and fire has broken out in a high-rise block of flats. The fire spreads quickly up the cladding on the side of the building into flats above. Residents are told their best way of keeping safe is to stay put. But this wasn't Grenfell Tower. It was Lakanal House in Southwark in 2009, 8 years before Grenfell. It was a fire that claimed 6 lives and led to this from the head of London's fire brigade.
I'm very, very sorry that 6 people died. I hope that we were able to move on now, learn the lessons from Lakanal House and make sure we can try and make sure these things don't happen again.
In 2013, the coroner at the Lakanal House inquest made a number of recommendations to help prevent such future deaths, raising concerns about cladding, about poor refurbishment of blocks and urging the government to review fire safety rules. Ronnie King remembers it well. This was him back in 2017, surrounded by the 16 letters his Parliamentary Committee on Fire Safety had written to government, asking when that review would be done.
The final letter really was, if you don't do what we're asking you to do, which is not ridiculous, it's bringing forward life safety matters out of the review, bringing them forward because they're so serious, they must come forward and be dealt with now, not in 3 years' time. These are more important than that. You need to do it now. And the ministers consecutively replied, we see nothing, hear nothing that causes us to change our mind. It will be, the review will take 3 years and we're not going to change anything or bring anything forward.
In fact, the review hadn't been done by the time of the Grenfell fire.
It was, I wouldn't want to say it was predictable. It was horrific. But you know, there was no comfort in saying, well, we told you so, because We shouldn't have had to tell that.
72 people lost their lives in Grenfell Tower in June 2017, and days later the Prime Minister Theresa May ordered a public inquiry. Its first phase reported back 2 years later. Many families still left demanding answers.
My family, why? Day and night I no sleep, always cry.
There was strong criticism of London's fire brigade, particularly its decision to tell residents to stay put in their flats. There was criticism too of the brigade's commissioner, Danny Cotton, for these comments to the inquiry.
I wouldn't change anything we did on the night. I think, without exception, my firefighters, my officers and my control staff performed in a fantastic way, given the incredible circumstances they were faced against.
Things did change for the brigade after phase 1. New, taller ladders brought in, smoke hoods to help in evacuations, and a change in the stay put advice. Alongside that, the process of taking dangerous cladding off buildings began, and it still goes on. A process that's taken too long, according to Dame Judith Hackett. She carried out a review of building regulations for government in 2018.
We are moving in the right direction, but I share everyone else's frustration that we're not getting there fast enough, particularly on remediating and rectifying the buildings that are already there. We've got people living in those buildings who've been there for 7 years living in fear. That cannot be right.
Evidence of that came just last week. 100 people escaped from this block of flats in Dagenham. It was having cladding removed.
So to be absolutely clear, I have 1,300 buildings in London that are, from my opinion, unremediated and must be as a priority. This is one of very many of them. It is the responsibility of building owners and managers to make sure the systems inside their buildings function properly. And actually, perhaps in that number, it gives you the idea of the challenge we face as a service to hold them to account.
His words and these images, perhaps an indication of just why so many people are looking for answers and action from phase 2 of the Grenfell Inquiry when it reports on Wednesday. Carl Mercer, BBC London.
And just to say, on Wednesday, when the final report from the Grenfell Public Inquiry is published, here at BBC London, we'll have a day of special coverage across online, TV and radio.